Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, Spider-Man was married. We all knew that Peter Parker and Mary Jane were married, and those were good times. And then it happened. We all know what I'm talking about. And that's why we don't call it by name. It's best not to name the evil when it's not necessary. Because that's not exactly what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about, as you probably saw from the thumbnail and from the title, is dealing with the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane. But it's not necessarily dealing with the marriage itself, it's more so dealing with the wedding. If you didn't know, Spider Man did get married at Shea Stadium in real life. This was an event that actually took place. And we're going to talk about that today because I've always found it just to be an interesting little fact of history, and I don't really see it mentioned all that often, so I figured it would be an interesting topic. But whilst I was in the middle of just getting some more background information on it, that I uncovered something that I myself did not actually know about. And that was that Spider-Man also had a bachelor party right before the wedding, as one does. And that story just intrigued me even more. So I felt the need to include that in this as well. So if you'll permit me, we're going to talk about when it was that Spider-Man got married at Shea Stadium and he had his bachelor party with the Green Goblin popping out of a cake right before. So the reason why I found out about this because, like I said, I was actually doing the research for the actual, like, talking about the wedding. I was doing that part first, and then whilst I was doing that, I got linked to basically the blog of the guy who was in the Spider-Man costume that day at Shea Stadium, and he actually also talked about the time that he was dressed up as the Green Goblin for the bachelor party. So I just kind of want to read you an excerpt from that particular story because I found this one to just be wild. So, when talking about how it was that he got this particular gig, he mentions that it was the 25th anniversary of the creation of Spider Man as we know. And then he mentions to celebrate Peter Parker, the web slinger's alter ego was going to get married in the Spider Man titles to his girlfriend Mary Jane Watson. As part of the marketing for this event, Marvel was staging a live bachelor party for Spider Man. In attendance, besides Marvel's hierarchy and the press, would be a pantheon of superheroes. Actually, whatever ones they had costumes for at the time, which were Captain America, the Incredible Hulk, and X-Men members Iceman and the superheroine Firestar. Part of my role concerned my entering the festivities by jumping out of a cake that would be wheeled out as everyone sang for He's a Jolly Good Fellow. Upon the song's completion, I would burst from the cake and deliver my lines. My script for this event ran approximately 3 lines, hastily written by the publicity department that afternoon. But he says what made it harder was that his biggest concern was jumping out of the cake because the giant tiered confection was constructed of pressed wood, not very well either, if the splinters that covered my body afterwards were any indication, and the shoddy paint job was chipping. It was purchased that day, probably from a prop warehouse, and probably after a desperate search when the marketing wizard, who thought of the idea, got the thumbs up from upper management. The top tier was hinged onto the base, which had no bottom, and the whole cake was put on a large wheeled dolly. He also describes that the costume was made out of basically the same type of stretch material they used for the Spider-Man costume, and it was dyed a cartoony green covered in black silkscreen scales. Over that was worn a fluorescent fuchsia tunic with matching shorts, gloves, and saddlebag. The boots were not so much boots as gaiters that covered my sneakers. They shared the same fuchsia coloring normally reserved for the sort of upholstery only found in strip clubs, and the toes curled up so they gave the appearance of elven boots. Unfortunately, they weren't stretchable and obviously were not made with a size 12 foot in mind. They had a feeble elastic swatch on the bottom that barely kept them in place. My Converse All-Star high tops were plainly in view underneath. But the boots were a dream compared to the mask, a hard latex Iron Maiden for one's noggin. On the plus side, it looked great and had a long cap, more fluorescent fuchsia, attached to it. On closer inspection, it looked like someone used a case of rubber cement to glue the topper in place. The eyes were mesh, like Spider-Man's costume, but hard plastic or equivalent, not fabric, also cemented into place, dangerously so. No attempt was made to smooth the eyes inside, which fit perilously close to the wearer's eyes, and as with the cap, no rubber cement was wasted in applying the eyes to the inside of the headpiece. The abundance of hardened glue in the mask produced a potent, malodorous aroma that made one's eyes water. It also produced the same psychedelic mind warping that sniffing glue affected. The increased heat and sweat of the wearer only exacerbated the problem. Do I even have to tell you how poor the vision was? And that sounds about right to me, considering that back in the day, especially with these costumes, there's a lot more care that's put into them now because there's been a lot more thought into, the care that these actors need, especially considering they have to be physical. Many times they're outdoors, so it can get very sweaty in a minute. And considering the construction materials that they've used in the past, it's a good thing that now people are a lot more mindful of that. He then goes on to mention that Stan Lee was also among the crowd, and that after what seemed like hours, eventually Captain America comes to get him and starts wheeling him out, and they go on to complete the routine. He does also provide something to the best of his memory how the script actually played out, and as you can see from here, basically they wheeled him out right at the end of the song. That's when he starts cackling from inside of the cake, getting everybody where they're supposed to gasp, but he said that it was a little bit more like a few chuckles and people saying, "Oh brother." And then of course the heroes all brace themselves for whatever evil might pop out of this cake. And then Spider-Man saying, "I should have known you'd try something like this, Goblin." To which he just told him, "Relax, Spider-Man. I've come merely to congratulate you on your impending nuptials." And then Spider-Man hesitates before deciding just to go ahead and trust him, and they shake hands. And then it does get a little bit more interesting when he says that after that, he was free to mingle with any of the guests. So he goes to the back to go and get out of his costume, and then he comes back out only to realize everybody has already left. And the only people left are the employees who are basically just stacking chairs, getting ready to go home. And that was how Spider-Man's bachelor party ended. So like I said, I found that very interesting. But to get into the main event, let's talk about what actually happened, starting with this little bit of coverage that actually happened right before the actual main event itself.
It's 19 minutes past the hour right now. For years, we've been watching as one of our favorite superheroes, Spider-Man, who's also known as Peter Parker, lusted after his gorgeous girlfriend, Mary Jane Watson. Well, I know you've been waiting for this, and here it is. Tomorrow at New York's Shea Stadium, Spider-Man and Mary Jane will finally get married. And we have the privilege of joining them this morning at a prenuptial gathering at Shea Stadium. There's the lovely couple. They're there with Stan Lee, who not only created these two, but also the Incredible Hulk, Dr. Strange, and many, many more comic legends. Mr. Lee will officiate at the wedding tomorrow. Stan, Spider-Man's been with us for, some 25 years now. He's been crazy about Mary Jane for many, many years, too. Why did you decide now that they should get married?
Oh, just look at this couple. How could you keep them apart longer than 25 years?
What about you, Spidey? How do you feel about getting married now? Why did you decide at this point to marry MJ?
Well, actually, I'm a little nervous. I was up pacing the ceiling last night, but no, it's time. I'm in love, and it's going to be happily ever after. I can guarantee that. Right, Stan?
Well, I don't know. I haven't written that part yet.
MJ, you've had many, many boyfriends, and many of them have been richer, more glamorous, even, dare I say, handsomer than Peter Parker. So why him?
Well, it's all that webbing, those tricks that he can do with them. It just won my heart.
But life with Spider-Man is likely to be rather dangerous. I mean, considering all of his exploits, his flying around and his wall climbing and dangling from the web. Aren't you concerned about the danger?
I am. But I have a feeling that everything will be fine.
She knows if it gets too heavy, I can always write her out of it in some way, or Spidey. In fact, if these planes get too noisy overhead, if it were a comic strip, we would just erase them.
Spidey, I know that MJ refused to marry you once because she was concerned about the children, you know? Would you have children that were like little spider babies, or would they be normal human babies?
Well, as long as they're healthy, that's all I care about. Actually, as long as they have 2 arms and 8 legs. No, that is a concern. But if they do have my powers, well, I'll just have to teach them to use their powers responsibly. A tough lesson that I had to learn.
Now, MJ, I understand the late Willie Smith designed the wedding dress you're going to wear. Tell us about that.
Oh, it's a beautiful dress, but I don't want to say too much because I don't want Spidey to know about it. But they also loaned me this beautiful dress today. They're so nice to me.
I hear a plane going over. Stan, if you can't hear me, I'll try to speak up a little bit.
Oh, I can hear you fine.
Okay, this is a little confusing to me. Now, Spidey is getting married in the flesh as Spider-Man tomorrow at Shea Stadium.
Right.
But he gets married as Peter Parker in the newspaper comic strips later this month. Then again gets married as Peter Parker in the comic book coming out next week. Now, isn't this a bit confusing? What will the fans think?
We at Marvel never do anything in an ordinary way. And
I guess not.
And besides, if the fans weren't confused, they would know it isn't Spider-Man and it isn't Marvel. We try to satisfy everybody in every situation. Obviously, he'll be married as Peter Parker in the strip.
Yeah.
But at Shea Stadium, for all the people watching who want to see Spider-Man, they want to see him in costume. I don't like it because he's out shining everybody else, but we have to go along with it.
Very, very quickly, Stan, aren't you taking a risk by...
I think I've lost my earpiece.
Aren't you taking a risk by bringing about such a dramatic change in the storyline? Pass the question on to him,
Well,
Wes.
thank you.
Spidey?
Yeah.
The storyline is being changed dramatically. Isn't that a risk for the strip?
Why don't you ask Stan that?
I'm sorry, I missed.
Aren't you taking... No, well, we don't have time for that now. I guess your fans won't care. They love you anyhow, right? Good luck, and maybe Spidey can warm up his right arm and pitch for the Mets tomorrow night.
Thank you, and we'll all see you tomorrow.
In today's People postscripts, even cartoon characters can fall in love and get married, or so the creators of Spider-Man would have us believe.
The tongue-in-cheek ceremony was an intimate one. 50,000 guests were on hand at Shea Stadium to watch cartoon character Spider-Man marry longtime love Mary Jane Watson.
I pronounce you Spider-Man wife.
Spider-Man creator Stan Lee officiated at the home plate ceremony. The cartoon couple is taking a honeymoon trip to the Riviera and will probably live happily ever after, at least until the next issue of The Amazing Spider-Man.
The wedding issue of the Spider-Man comic hits newsstands tomorrow.
So I really have to say, I think my favorite part of that video, number one, is the reporter really asking him, like, are y'all concerned that possibly the babies could be born as little spiderlings? I was like, dude, I know that, number one, you have to know that this is obviously a normal person, but also, do you think that Spider-Man is actually part spider? Like, I know he has the spider powers, but do you think that he actually has spider anatomy? Is that why you're asking that question? That was just hilarious to me. The other part that I really loved was the part right at the end when Stan was trying to say, like, to everybody, like, please be sure to come and join us, and he just gets cut off right at the end. That...
Good luck, and maybe Spidey can warm up his right arm and pitch for the Mets tomorrow night.
Thank you, and we'll all see you tomorrow.
Oh, man, it really did go right off the rails right there at the end, Stan, didn't it? Poor guy. He was giving it his damnedest, but then the earpiece was just determined to just tear it all down right at the very end. I loved that. It was so funny to me. I think I also love from the coverage at the end is the male reporter who's just...
In today's People postscripts, even cartoon characters can fall in love and get married, or so the creators of Spider-Man would have us believe. The wedding issue of the Spider-Man comic hits newsstands tomorrow.
He's just barely containing his contempt for, like, everything that he's talking about. You could tell how much he's just like, this is a joke. Why the fuck am I having to talk about this? Who cares about this? Like, you could just tell he didn't care even a little bit. And I was cracking up looking at him, just having to talk about it. But so what happened? So what was it that actually happened with this event? So let's kind of go into it. I think one of the things that makes this very interesting is I was reading Jim Shooter's actual recollection of this event. Of course, we couldn't even coordinate between departments at 387 Parks Avenue South. Ignoring both the strip and the comic book, Marvel's crack PR people arranged to stage Spider-Man's wedding at home plate in Shea Stadium during a Mets game. And of course, it was Spider-Man, not Peter Parker, getting married to Mary Jane. Okay, I suppose that was a change they had to make for that venue anyway. Everyone entering the stadium was given a free copy of the wedding issue. I was there, invited by the PR people, though I no longer worked at Marvel. Hardly anyone paid attention to the wedding. Almost all the 50,000 or so comic books, it seemed, were ripped apart and used to make paper planes, dropped on the floor, or thrown in the trash. Sad. The wedding reception was held that evening at the Tunnel, a nightclub in the city. Another bizarre choice, in my opinion. Oh well, not my worry anymore. I raised my glass of grapefruit juice to the bride and groom, said goodnight to friends from the old workplace, and went home. Now, whether or not everybody actually destroyed their issue of the comic that they were given there, it does seem that there were at least some people who held on to some of the items that they actually got there. I guess some of the actual comic book fans did end up going out there, but I have seen at least one picture of it all together, and I'll actually put it up on here. As you can see, it looks like there was the wedding issue. There was also this poster that is nightmare fuel. I think we can all just agree on that. And then there was this little program card, I guess. And then, of course, this bag that was given to them, I guess, to just put everything in from the actual event itself. And then one of Jim's longtime collaborators, Janet J.J. Jackson, also mentions how the idea was suggested to them to include a fun little lighted pin that they could offer to the retailers. And apparently it was a very popular product. So I can see why. It does seem pretty cute. It does seem like the type of thing, I'm not even going to lie about it, that I would unironically want to possess. I know it's not for everybody, but it would be for me. I like stuff that lights up, so call me a sucker for it. I don't even care. Now, as you heard me mention there, one of the things that they did with this actual event was they had Mary Jane marry Spider-Man, not Peter Parker, because they had, even though we all know who Spider-Man is, because this is taking place in real life, they had to still pretend like there would be villains trying to find out Spider-Man's secret identity, so they had to maintain that by having her marry Spider-Man. But as for the woman who played Mary Jane herself, her name was Tara Shannon, and she was a model. And one of the things that I found interesting was this little blurb that came from the New York Times coverage at the time when they wrote, at the final fitting of her gown, Miss Watson, actually Tara Shannon, a model, said the wedding had to be held in Shea Stadium to accommodate all her previous beaux. This might explain Spider-Man's recent behavior. He's been pacing the ceiling for weeks, she said. They have to have the wedding here just to accommodate all of her previous beaux. Are y'all just trying to like slut shame her or something? I mean, if she has that many men that she's, I guess, been with or just dated, I mean, because for one thing, she's still a young woman. So for a stadium of about, what, I don't know, 45, 50,000 people, for that to be all of her previous beaux, like, what is this random ass pot shot that they just decided to take at Mary Jane? Very random. It kind of struck me as weird when they threw that in there. I was like, wait, why did they put that there? That was just a weird choice. But I don't know. It was also just kind of funny to me. So I figured it was worth mentioning. Another thing people might find interesting is that Mary Jane at this live event actually wore a wedding dress that was designed by Willie Smith, and it turned out to be his final design before passing away from AIDS complications. And there was actually a little bit of information written up about this in Jet magazine that came out at the time, saying Smith's associates had said when he was offered the opportunity to design a wedding gown for the cartoon bride, he liked the idea immediately because he never took his clothes too seriously and believed dressing should be fun. The bride, the fictional Mary Jane Watson of Forest Hills, New York, wore Smith's satin, lace, and tulle high neck and form-fitting gown. The bridegroom, in his red hooded Spider-Man costume, also wore tails, cummerbund, and white bow tie. Unfortunately, there is very little to no footage of the actual event itself other than like the news coverage that I've already shown you, and that's basically all that we have to go off of here. I mean, it was meant to coincide with, Spider-Man getting married in the comics and also in the newspaper strip. So it was all just part of an attempt to get the interest there. And I think, if you don't mind me just waxing nostalgic, I guess, for a moment, for a time that I didn't even live in. But basically, I just find it very interesting that there was such an attempt to have this brought to the masses in a way that we nowadays would probably, I mean, if something like this were happening, it would probably be a sold out event. People would be there in their Marvel. It would probably be entirely just MCU fans there, or even just Spider-Man fans showing up for that particular event. But back at the time, I mean, just from the descriptions that have been given, it was not treated very, very seriously. Jim Shooter kind of describes how nobody really cared that much that it was going on. The model who portrayed Spider-Man mentioned that the baseball players basically also thought that it was just like, it was a joke. They kind of looked at them like, with scorn. I think that was the way he described it. So at the time, it really didn't mean very much to anybody other than hardcore comic fans and, the people working at Marvel, people like Stan Lee, because that was Stan's push for the longest time to make Marvel into more or less what it is today. I'm not really sure that he would have agreed or liked what Marvel is at the present moment, but you know, he was definitely pushing his entire life to make Marvel just this household name, and you know, the stories and everything. You know, he wanted that, and it's for better or worse. I mean, that's why you definitely have to be careful what you wish for, but I mean, more or less, and it's not all on Stan. I mean, there were a lot of talented artists and writers as well that were also, you know, putting in their talent and their time. But I mean, just thinking about the difference, the night and day difference, because you look at something like that, I imagine myself, had I gone to something like that, I would still absolutely have all of that stuff that I was given. But like I said, at the time, it probably didn't seem like that big of a deal to so many people. And now looking back, I wonder how many people that were there at the time, probably like, you know, as kids or teenagers, how many of them look back now and wish that they would have kept any of the shit that they had gotten that day. I don't know. It's kind of interesting to think about, but it's this is one of those topics that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Just because, like I said, I had this brought back to the forefront of my mind not that long ago. And since then, I was just thinking on it, and I decided, you know what? I should do a video just kind of talking about this particular wedding event, because I think that it's something interesting to talk about. And then during the course of reading up on it, I ended up teaching myself something about it. So I just decided that kind of solidified that I should make a video talking about it. And now here we are. We're at the end of me making this particular video. So I would love to know, what do you think about this particular event having happened? I know it's sad that they went to all of this effort for something like this, just for, you know, years later it to be all undone, and now we're brought up to the present day where nothing seems to make sense anymore. But it is what it is. Who knows? Maybe eventually the timeline smooths out. You know what I mean? For a while, it's kind of been like this. Maybe we're getting to where it smooths out. I don't know. Who knows? We'll see what ends up happening. But yeah, let me know what you think about, you know, this particular topic. Was this something that you had heard about? If it was, had you heard about the bachelor party thing? Because I hadn't heard about that. That one really blew my damn mind. So yeah, feel free to share your thoughts with me down below in the comments. If you liked the video, go ahead and like the video. If you didn't like the video, well, I applaud you for watching this long, and hey, go ahead and hit the dislike button. It's not going to hurt my feelings. But yeah, go ahead and, like I said, leave me a comment. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And if you're done here, then I suggest you go and read a book. But if not, well, then I'll see you on my next video.
Me.